All right. Welcome, guys, to a very special episode of The Left Wing. Now, I know it's usually me and TJ with another content creator as a guest discussing current events, but we're doing something a little bit different today because I have the pleasure of introducing Steve Kerrigan, who is the chair of the Massachusetts Democratic Party and has a long storied career in politics. And he agreed to sit down with us to tell us a little bit about what state Democratic parties do, and also just discuss the election and politics in general with us. So, Steve, welcome. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me, John. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Awesome. So, wanted to just jump straight in. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you found yourself in the position you are now? And I'd love to hear a little bit about what does a state Democratic Party chair actually do?
When I figure that out, you'll be the first one to know. So a little bit about me. So I grew up in central Massachusetts, in the town that my husband and I live in now, Lancaster, a little tiny town. I was the son of two union members. My mom was an MTA member for 40 plus years. My dad was a utility worker. And when I was young, my dad was on strike a lot. So we really saw firsthand the impact of organized labor and how the strike fund helped protect our family in those tough times. And so growing up, it was never a question what political party we were going to be a part of, in our family anyway. And we were taught, the sort of the democratic values, organized labor's values were our values. And so I just was bit early on with an interest in politics, wanted to go to college near Washington. Being one of three in a working class household, had to go to a state school. So I went to University of Maryland, got an internship in my first week in school in the mailroom in Ted Kennedy's office. And stayed there, not in the mailroom, but stayed with him for supposed to be a semester. And I stayed 14 years and had an incredible education in what it meant to be a public servant and in problem solving, things like that. And so that from there, my career began. And from him, I went to the Attorney General's office, ran a convention, host committee, worked for President Obama's campaign for president, worked on both of his inaugurations and ran his second convention, and ran for office myself. I was the Democratic nominee for lieutenant governor back in 2014. And then got recruited to run a health center, which came out of nowhere, which I do when I'm not running the party. And then when my friend and someone I greatly admire, Maura Healey, got elected governor, we were talking about how I could be helpful and impactful to her in her time in office. And she asked if I would chair the party. And here I am. And so I took over about 16 months ago or so. And it's been a ride, man. It was a busy, crazy ride before this summer and the debate and the switch and everything that's happened in between. But being chair of a party, particularly in Massachusetts, is an exciting time. But people think it's a really easy job, right? We're in Massachusetts. We have a supermajority. Everybody's a Democrat. People forget that in my lifetime, and I turned 53 this week, my lifetime, we've only had my voting lifetime, we've had two Democrats elected governor in Massachusetts, Deval Patrick and Maura Healey, and that's it. So there's a lot of work we have to do. And then there's a lot of work that I have to do to the rank and file Democrats to show that being an active member of the Democratic Party matters and can be impactful here in Massachusetts, not just on the work we do here, but all around the country. So it's there is no typical day, but all of them are interesting, and every one of them gives an opportunity to challenge me and what I get to do as chair.
Yeah, cool. No, we talk about, for example, Tim Walz. We're really high praise for the job that he's done in a state that isn't deep blue, such as Massachusetts, that regularly votes blue, and what he's been able to accomplish there. And we often use that, and not to say Massachusetts, for example, but we often use that as an example of, hey, New York, California, you could be doing better,
Right.
And obviously there's different problems, conflicts within the Democratic Party in each individual state. And I think a lot of times we think about them as just blankets that can be applied everywhere. But I know that's not the case. And that's a common misconception that people have about, Democratic politics at a local level versus a national level. Yeah. Could you tell me a little bit about the particular dynamics of Democratic politics in Massachusetts that, many people might not be aware of, especially on the national level, that you think it would make your job a little bit easier if people understood.
Yeah, so it's an interesting. I appreciate bringing it up. So it's really interesting because folks assume, yes, we have a lot of Democratic voters, although the vast majority of voters in Massachusetts are unenrolled, as you know. But within our party, I mean, we run the gamut, right? We run the gamut from what the stereotype is, run the gamut from the Cambridge, Somerville, super left progressive to, the South Boston or Central Mass, sort of more conservative or centrist Democrat. And we see that play out in some of our primaries across the Commonwealth. I wouldn't say it's a challenge for me because we're a big tent and I welcome all types of Democrats to our party and to the conversation. But what I encourage folks to do is also be welcoming, that you can have a different view than one of your fellow Democrats without being the enemy. And oftentimes, just as in this country, we're so polarized, in states like ours that can be overly, sometimes to some people's interpretation, overly democratically influenced, there's that same polarization within the party itself. And so it's how do we galvanize and row in one direction. And I will say this is something that our party has done beautifully since July the 21st, when everyone, and I've been involved in partisan politics for a very long time, everyone galvanized behind the Harris campaign from day one. I think it took us 24 hours in Massachusetts for 116 delegates elected by their peers all across Massachusetts to all join in one in endorsing Vice President Harris. And people can't skip out on how impactful that is. That entire convention wasn't about being more of a purist on one issue versus another. It wasn't forcing our candidate to address our issues in the way in which we wish to address it. It was all about working together to make history with Kamala Harris as our nominee. And look, I remember 92. That was the first convention I went to. Obviously, I was like 3 years old. Definitely not out of college. It was a heated presidential campaign that year, and people brought that to Madison Square Garden. There was still a lot of infighting. Same thing, less so in 96, got to reelect 2000. Same thing with Bradley and Gore. Definitely the same thing in 08 for Clinton and Obama, even by the time we got to the convention. So this campaign was all about how we can move forward. And that's the big challenge in a party like Massachusetts, is to get people focused on the result, focused that we are all in this for a vision that is about that new way forward that Harris talks about, and not about necessarily the purest way. My old boss, Ted Kennedy, God bless him, was one of the most ardent partisan Democrats, but he also passed the most pieces of bipartisan legislation than any other legislator in the history of the Republic. And he did so by having ideas and having ideals, but also understanding that results is what people are looking for. So.
Yeah, the old Lion of the Senate. Still, the memory's still going strong there. So,
TJ, can you believe that he's experienced infighting in
right?
the left?
Exactly,
as online content creators, we have no experience with that.
John read my mind on that one, because this is something that we run across all the time. And for us, it's kind of fun in a lot of ways, but it's incredibly disheartening because with the Harris thing, John and I did an entire segment talking about how we hadn't seen anything like this before, where on like that, the party just consolidated. In fact, when Biden first stepped down, I saw the thing come across my phone and I was looking through it. And a little while later, John texted me about, Biden stepping down. And John, if you remember, my first reaction was, I'm kind of concerned that he didn't back Harris immediately. And then like 3 minutes later, he put out a statement saying, I said, okay, that's good. That's step one. Now, at the time, everyone was kind of worried. We didn't know what would happen. There was a lot of trepidation on what exactly would confer. But like you said, incredible. Like everybody just said, all right, let's go. We're in on this. And it was the most unified. There was about a 34-day period there where it was the most unified I'd ever seen anyone nominally left of center, that everyone just said, oh, we're going to back this. And I thought that was impressive. What I wanted to ask you about this you're in a unique and precarious position because you have to represent the Democrats of the state, which, yeah, I mean, you're not going to have moments like that where everybody has like an air of good feelings behind Harris and everything. Generally, you're going to be, brokering peace deals, because one thing we say about Republicans is that most Republicans think essentially the same thing, and they're essentially the same person, white conservatives. And with Democrats, it's a smattering of a whole bunch of people. What issues have you found are the easiest to get people to rally behind, and which ones are the most difficult in your position?
So it's interesting you say that. So first, I always hide behind the fact that we're not a policy body. So when people try to push me to say we should do this, I say, look, we're not a policy body. My job is to elect, re-elect, and support Democrats. But I think and I will say this, one of the most interesting interviews I saw about this coalescing around Harris was when they were announcing that Dick Cheney endorsed her, and they asked Bernie Sanders about it. And Bernie Sanders was like, hey man, like, I agree with him on absolutely nothing, but we see what needs to be done in this election. And so that's what, for me, I try to remind our membership, my job is to elect, re-elect, and support Democrats of all stripes. And so if you win your primary, I'm your guy. We are going to power through and get that done. I will say there are folks who, one of the most frequent arguments I heard prior to the switch, as I called July 21st, was, and this is more in the legislature, was why are we supporting Democrats who aren't there for single payer and not pushing for issues that are within our platform? And what I try to remind our Democrats all the time is platforms are statements of ideals, and they're aspirational, and they are goal setting. And I am a firm believer. We've had single payer or Medicare for all in our platform for more than a decade or two. And if we had not, I'm a firm believer that our legislature and our thought leaders would not have been pushed to do the Romney Care bill that we did back in 2005 that added universal care here in Massachusetts. And then that, of course, was the basis for the Affordable Care Act. So I try to remind our folks who get so excited and energized about the divisions, I try to remind them about how the work they've done has made palpable change in our lives. And so it sometimes works to get them to talk about the change that their positions have done. Sometimes it doesn't. And I've often said about leadership is that one of the hardest parts of leadership is being able to sit in the uncomfortable places. I'm not going to please everybody, and no party chair is going to please everybody. If you do, you won't be party chair for very long. Or shouldn't be anyway. And so I try to stay focused on electing, re-electing, and supporting Democrats. And if my membership is displeased with that, they have an opportunity every 4 years to show me how displeased they are and free up my evenings and weekends by sending me packing. But it is challenging. But I think if we focus, and that's what people in our party are longing for. And I will say this, Vice President Harris has done a fantastic job around framing all of the issues in a way that it's hard within the party to argue against. The freedom frame, as I call it, is really powerful, and because it's interpretive, right? You can interpret someone having the freedom to make their own healthcare decisions around, I want to fight for the Medicare for all, or I want to bolster Affordable Care Act, or I want to support women's right to make the reproductive choices. I mean, the frame itself is appealing to Democrats across the spectrum, and I think voters. And so we try to use everything we can to keep everybody in the tent. But I think the fact that we have a big tent empowers people to feel like their voice can be heard, and frankly, so can the person that they oppose on an issue.
It's funny that you bring that up, Steve, because something that we've said on this show, and I promise to our audience that we didn't tell Steve to say that, because we've said this multiple times, and before the switch happened, that Democrats should be the party that is taking the freedom mantle, that is taking the patriotism mantle, because that's honestly what our policies do. They give American citizens
100%.
more freedom, and we kind of have stuck away from that because it's been a Republican coded message. But we've been really happy to see where Kamala has kind of taken that, just instantly reframed messaging for the Democratic Party.
It's funny. So sorry, TJ, you were going to say something?
No.
So I serve for the last 9 years on the national board It was NARAL, Pro-Choice America. Now it's Reproductive Freedom for All. But I've served on that board and been fighting for reproductive freedom for nearly a decade. And after we saw during the fight to keep Brett Kavanaugh off the court, which of course wasn't successful, but it did galvanize a coalition like no other that had huge gains in the midterms in 2018 and kept going. We started through that argument, that discussion, to use that freedom frame. And then NARAL at the time started working with other progressive groups and other groups in Washington at different tables to talk about how well that polled, how well it got through to people. And from a reproductive freedom perspective, it's fantastic because libertarians, they want freedom. Like there's a whole group of folks who aren't necessarily registered Democrats, but they don't want the government involved in the decision making about their bodies or their kids or their schools or anything. And so if you can get folks focused around that idea of freedom and the way in which she talks about it, everything from freedom to open a small business, buy a home, make your own healthcare decisions, send your kid to school without worrying about them getting shot. I mean, you can put everything in that frame, and Donald Trump can hug and kiss as many flags as he wants, but that's not going to send the message that consistent sense of messaging is going to.
So Steve, you mentioned how libertarians are always saying that they don't want government interference, and abortion is a good argument for that. It's also a good, BS test for libertarians because
totally.
if all of a sudden they have a problem with abortion, it's like, okay, I guess, personal freedom isn't your real issue after all. You have some sort of other beliefs, that sounds suspiciously similar to hashism or something. So, that's kind of what, and then I was going to say something about how you mentioned you went to the DNC convention when you were 3 years old because you were born in 1989, of course.
Yeah, totally.
And yeah, you're a big proponent of toddlers getting involved in the political process. I was like, well, libertarians have beat you to it. They already think like toddlers, so that's taken care of. Don't worry about that. Now, with the freedom frame, John and I do speak about this a lot, that folks, we know it's hokey, we know it's corny and everything. You see the Republicans gathered around wearing their Ben Franklin hats and waving flags and stuff. Yeah, I got it. But we can't surrender things like the flag and words like freedom or the church that the Republicans have taken away from the Democrats. And so we do have to work on that. So not only do we have to work on positive messaging, on saying, hey, listen, we are Americans and we are proud to be part of this nation. We love this country. We want to make it the best as possible, because you only go so far on cynicism. That's not really going to get you very far. But that's for the positive messaging. What about the negative, as in what we could remove? I don't know if you want to go down this road, but John and I talk about how a lot of times our rhetoric is almost necessarily academic, and it loses people, not because they're dumb, that's not what I'm saying, but if you haven't, read about these topics, saying something, anarcho-syndicalism, you're losing everybody. So talking about this stuff really loses the audience, or even stuff like critical race theory or stuff like that. You may confuse folks. Have you run across that and or anytime?
Yeah, so everyone knows the exact way to win every election. And they all feel like they should share it with me. And that's great. I love it.
Sure.
Yeah. And what I try to tell people, I had a conversation this morning. I don't know if you've been following the economic numbers. I mean, the gas price has gone down 22 cents a gallon in the last month. I mean, if you compare all the economic statistics to even a year ago, Vice President Harris is doing everything that the Republicans say she is doing the opposite of. And I had a friend on the phone today telling me, well, you need to do these palm cards and that lay out all of the economic data pieces and put the chart of where the gas. I was like, look, you can do that if you want, but we just have to hammer home. She is lower. Gas prices are lower than they were. I get. Here's the problem: is when we start using the super lofty and flowery language and technical language, they're gone. People are gone. They feel it's not that they don't understand it. It's that you're not getting them. You're not grabbing them and not holding their attention, because they think the other side says it all the time. Gas prices are through the roof. This is the worst economy ever.
Yeah.
All of it. We're an embarrassment to the world. All these things that are not true, but they just keep saying them over and over again. And so we have to, on some of those messages, be as simplistic as we can be, which is where the freedom frame comes in. If you force everybody to think around the idea of that, around the freedom to own a small business, freedom to save money for their kids' college, freedom, it really pushes me and gets people to think about their own personal economy. I like the opportunity economy phrase because people's economies are totally different. Like your economy is different than the one that I have in my house with my husband, and our priorities are different. And our budgeting is different. So like talking to people in terms that they understand, I think makes sense. But what I also try to tell people when they come up with the perfect plan that will win every election, every single time, is I tell them to go right ahead, tell all their friends. But if they're talking to swing voters, we need to talk in a much more relatable term because we're going to lose them. And you talk about what to get rid of. I think that's an important thing to get rid of. And I think honestly, as much as we can't ignore him, but as much as we can to avoid Donald Trump and avoid talking about Donald Trump constantly, all the better. I have loved their eating dogs and cats meme like anybody else. And I've been all over TikTok watching those. They're fantastic. But the scary thing is they made that story up and they're just being allowed to get away with it. So the work we have to do is talk about the real issues. And I think the vice president did it well when she pivoted back to, look, we had a bipartisan immigration deal and you said no. Like we'd be there, but for you. So it's tricky when you play against a liar who just keeps, you could dunk on him and he'd say, I hit a hole in one. I mean, he'd make up a totally different sport. It doesn't matter. Yeah. So I think taking away that and talking about the positive stuff, I think is really, really important, particularly from a candidate perspective.
TJ likes to say how, everyone was like, oh, you can't beat a liar in a debate, but it's quite easy. And Kamala really did do a great job of just, you ignore all the lies, you focus on one thing, you give your message. And she did a great job of that.
Yeah, but John, you forget that she did that, but then at the end, she just put a little catnip out every time.
She baited it perfectly.
So any chance he had to respond to the facts that she laid out or her position she laid out, he took, because he's such an egomaniac, he took to talk about crowd sizes and ridiculous things, so he never could get his legitimate policy arguments out, which I thought was just a thing of beauty.
Yeah, exactly. And to wrap this up here, because we don't have too much more time, Steve, but I know it's crazy. 22 minutes went by so fast here. We totally will. But before we do, just let us know, what do you think is going to happen in November?
Well, I think whatever's going to happen in November is starting soon. So the end of this week, Pennsylvania starts early vote. And so folks who are watching this and know anybody in Pennsylvania or are willing to make phone calls into Pennsylvania or go and knock doors in Pennsylvania, the voting starts now. So when traditional election day now, that's just the day we count. We start recording votes at the end of this week. I think the American people are so tired. They're exhausted. Just the idea of a new face. And look, the vice president's been vice president for almost 4 years. But just turning on the television and seeing a new player. And I love Joe Biden. I was a Joe Biden supporter when he first ran, when he ran in 2007. I was a supporter in 2019. I love him. And I think he did what is a very typical Joe Biden thing, but a very incredible and extraordinary act of patriotism in stepping down. But what a refreshing change for the American people. And you put on top of that, this is the first election, national election, since the Dobbs decision. You put on top of that, the Harris-Walz ticket is a ticket about opportunity. It's a ticket about us. It's a campaign that has a vision for the future. And you juxtapose that to every time President Trump talks, he's running this country down. Runs us down, creates this dystopian view that no one sees out their window. Sometimes they see it in their wallet because things are a little bit more expensive than they were. But we have this really fantastic opportunity. And I don't like to predict elections. But I will say, had I written down in 2017 in February when I told my husband that the next ticket for president, vice president was going to be Biden-Harris, a lot of money. I would have made a lot of money in Vegas had I bet that. But I think we're going to see a Harris administration. I think we're going to see, if we work hard over the next 50 days, 49 days, 7 weeks, we are going to see a House of Representatives. There are so many available flippable seats in the House of Representatives. I think if we keep Sherrod Brown and John Tester, I think we're going to see us keep a Democratic Senate. And then, man, we're going to see a thing of beauty, because we're going to see Washington working for the people and getting things done for our country, and taking the great mantle that Joe Biden is handing to Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and really make it soar. So I like to say I'm toxically optimistic about this election, because I want my toxicity to spread in a very powerful way. I want it to spread everywhere. I want this optimism to go to all of you. There's work to do, no doubt. This is a tied race. In every one of these swing states, she's a little bit up, but every Republican is running against her, whether they're running for president or dog catcher. And so we've got to push back against all that, but we do it, we win.
Yeah. Steve, if you're going to predict the presidential election, this is the one to do it. I think you're good. I think this is the one to predict.
Hey, look, I thought Hillary was going to win too.
Yeah.
Right. We are a nation that was once bitten and definitely twice shy. So we didn't fall for it in 2020. We're definitely not going to fall for it in 2024.
I couldn't agree more, Steve. And let's all just knock on wood here right after saying this. But yes, we very much hope that is the outcome. And we would love to have you back on the show. So we'll follow up with you. But for now, thank you very much. For anyone who, I don't know, we usually ask our guests for anyone who wants to find you elsewhere, where they can find you. But that might not apply to you since you're not a content creator. So any parting messages you'd like to leave with our audience?
You can find me on my Twitter handle, I suppose, and send me a direct message or something. But final message is, look, the decisions are made by people who show up. So show up, have your voice heard. Show up not just on election day or when you file your ballot, if it's early voting, but pick up a phone, call your friends in a swing district, remind your family to get out and vote, volunteer for a candidate of your choice. Don't wake up on November 6th and regret not having given your all to help shape the future of this country.
Agree. Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks a lot, folks. You can find John and I at the Left Wing Pod, and you can find Steve at your local party boss smoke-filled back room. He'll be there just waiting, just moving the puppet strings. It'll be fantastic. But thanks a lot, Steve. We appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, TJ. Appreciate it. Thanks, John.